HRN listeners. As we celebrate our 15th year, we are deepening our commitment to giving voice to the next generation of food systems storytellers, and we need your help. Our internship and fellowship programs help activate new possibilities for underrepresented and underestimated young people through experiential journalism, audio engineering, and production training. Through these unique programs, HRN helps food equity stewards build essential workforce readiness skills that expand their potential and foster economic mobility. Please consider supporting these critical programs. And with a minimum donation, you can be entered to win a dinner for two at an amazing restaurant in one of 8 cities and tickets to a concert at a great venue in one of those cities. We have incredible partners across the country who have donated, as they also share our passion for helping to educate the next generation of food systems storytellers. Check out heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. That's heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. And make sure you donate before March 31st. Thank you.
Hey, what's up? This is John Norris, and you're listening to the Heritage Radio Network.
All right, once again, you have tuned in to the Heritage Radio Network. It is Thursday at 1 o'clock, and you are listening to The Farm Report. We are coming to you live from the back of Roberta's on a beautiful sunny day in Bushwick, Brooklyn. We are here in studio with Heather Carlucci-Rodriguez and Alyssa Westerveld of the Chefs for Marcellus. Welcome to the studio, ladies.
Good afternoon.
Excellent to have you here. So today we are going to be taking our listeners through a bunch of issues with regards to fracking. So I thought we would start a little bit by explaining what exactly is Chefs for Marcellus.
Chefs for Marcellus was started actually not long ago in August when Hillary Baum of the Bound Forum came to me and knew that I had already had much concern and much to say, quite loudly, about my concern about hydrofracking in New York State and the effect that it would have on farmers.
And, I mean, how did that issue kind of get on your radar or Hillary's radar? I mean, with all the kind of different stuff happening in the state and around agriculture, why was it that this kind of jumped out?
Well, Hillary's always been very much on the forefront of water and food issues in and around New York. For myself, my family's had a house in Sullivan County for many years, and I think the word just started coming up. I knew it was spoken about with my family, and then friends up there started being quite aggressive about thoughts, feelings, and I had to educate myself on that, and especially because my job has to do with the food shed.
And what is your job?
Right now, I'm the executive pastry chef at Print Restaurant, which is a farm-to-table restaurant in Hell's Kitchen.
Excellent. So what exactly is the organization designed to do? Like, what is your role? What is your mission?
Our mission is to really spread the word among our business in the food world, purveyors, chefs, restaurateurs, other farmers, to the effects of fracking on our food system and our business, and what could happen economically to our area.
Okay, so I want to tuck into a little bit about, I mean, we have talked a little bit about fracking on the show before, but just so that we're all on the same page, maybe you can give us kind of a quick definition of what it actually is.
Hydrofracking is high-power drilling that goes about 2 miles down into what would be a shale bed. And for us, the shale bed that affects us most is the Marcellus Shale. It covers much of Pennsylvania, it goes into Ohio, Michigan, and also well into New York. It covers Finger Lake area down to Sullivan County and little bits of Hudson Valley, pardon me. And what they do is with these huge drill heads, drill with enormous amount of carcinogens like I said, 2 miles down to release what they call natural gas, which is really just the spin for carcinogenic methane.
Okay, so then they're extracting this to use as a alternative fuel source.
Yes, that's correct.
And so the chefs from Marcellus are different chefs who've taken a stand against fracking, or?
Oh, it's chefs, restaurateurs, any sort of food purveyor, any sort of food business person, farmers. We don't discriminate against who will sign on. And it's been surprising because for an organization that's only been going since August, we've attracted enormous amount of attention.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think definitely anything that threatens the food system is of concern for a lot of people, in particular in the food world. So what about it? I mean, what about fracking is bad for food? I mean, I you're extracting the gas, but how does that impact, what we're eating or like how people are able to grow food?
Well, it directly impacts our watershed. And you can't do anything without water, namely grow food. And it does not only, relegate itself to, farm to table, which of course we're going by way of the farmers because this is the closest to land that we can get, but it really affects everything, industrial food, fast food. There's nothing that's untouched by it. And most areas that have been devastated by fracking, food goes into the body and the body can't handle the carcinogens.
So fracking is not currently occurring in New York State, but it is happening in surrounding areas? Many wells have been dug before there was a moratorium, and so the wells are just sitting there. Leases are being signed by the drilling companies, the leases are being presented by the drilling companies, and leases are being signed by farmers and landowners who right now, we're at a time where I think if you live in the world we do, it seems like there's a resurgence of farmers, but then there's plenty of farmers who have just been devastated for years. Like commodity dairy farmers are just, they're being destroyed by the system and are more than happy to sign off to, as far as they're concerned, the drillers will come in, drill for 5 years and leave and are told that their land will be, then untouched and ready to farm again, which isn't true. So, I'm sure the sales pitch as far as, putting in a drill head is not that we're going to come and pump toxic chemicals into your land. So there is kind of some of the stuff is happening as far as, getting people kind of set up so that when there's like a go, that drilling will be able to commence. You said there was a moratorium, so there was never any drilling happening in New York State, or it's like in process right now where we're kind of waiting for some.
We're waiting at the moment. I mean, you realize that all the areas surrounding New York, like Pennsylvania is just, it's been a free for all for the drilling companies. Much of Texas also, and it goes into parts of California, Wyoming. It's in many places.
So can you talk about maybe some examples of areas where things went wrong? I mean, are there specific incidences that we can point to and say like, hey, here's like proof that this is a dangerous practice? Or
Sure. The state of Pennsylvania, the majority of farmers who are affected by fracking and the people living around fracking sites are experiencing terrible disease, loss of memory. There are pockets of cancers and, or tumors. Farm animals are just being diseased, left and right. It's been a very difficult time for a lot of these people who, within best faith, signed their lease.
So they're kind of stuck in that situation now.
Yeah. I mean, you have to figure, farming is not a big money business for, small local farmers. They can't pick up and move.
Sure. And as far as, fracking, I think, often gets parsed as like a new technology or a new thing, but it seems like there is some amount of history there. I mean, do you know where the industry kind of arose from or how it got started in the U.S.?
Oh, I think from what I know, I don't know, exact details of history, but I believe it's been going on since like the early 50s, late 40s. Not in the extent that it is now. It was more of a test procedure.
So what do you think? Yeah.
So there were technological improvements that happened in the last 15 years that made it financially feasible. And so that's why there's been this resurgence of fracking, and it's become an issue recently, is because now all of a sudden it's financially viable to extract gas that way.
But there's another also inside of thinking that most people believe that they can't make the money that they've put into it, but it's a little too late to pull out.
So kind of rather than cutting your losses and run, you're going to kind of
keep going,
get what you can get, and then get out.
That's right.
And then what is the gas used for upon extraction? I mean, how is it entering the energy grid?
Running cars, buses, all the things that people want to do.
And so there's currently no. When we had Ken Jaffe of the Slope Beef Farm on, kind of talking about how fracking was impacting him as a farmer a few months ago, and he was talking a lot about issues that you touched on with regards to safety of the food supply, and had said that restaurants, yours included, print and other areas where he sells his beef, like the Park Slope Food Co-op, had already kind of stated that if fracking had started to occur in that area, that they wouldn't buy from him anymore. So, and he had mentioned that was really an issue of, like, it's this thing that you're releasing kind of into the air, but there's no kind of tests on the back end to determine whether or not the food is safe. And is that like the primary reason that people say no? Or
I think restaurants, chefs, and of course food co-ops are very socially aware. We have a responsibility. I mean, we're putting food in people's bodies. That's a huge responsibility. It's why we even have the health department. So for us not to really think ahead and say we're doing everything possible. I mean, I can say, our restaurant especially, because we're, running around with our fists in the air about this. We're doing everything possible because we have such close relationships with the farmers. But the fact is, if there is a problem and that, if there's a huge well being fracked, right next to a farm, there's very little chance that we know of right now that food will be uncontaminated. Very little. So I have to think twice. And it's not just about feeding my customers. It's about feeding myself, and it's about where my money comes from. And, and really how we're going to service ourselves and the people around us.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's like drawing out a lot of parallels with, buying food that's imported from Japan that people are, like, often concerned about now. Like, after the tsunami and kind of the, like, nuclear explosion is happening, there's no, like, what are the systems in place to kind of protect us as consumers or consumers in that region, where you essentially devastate agriculture of a whole kind of section of the country, which seems kind of crazy. So where is this stuff kind of getting decided? Is it in the legislature? Is it in the courts? I mean, who's kind of pushing the button to say, like, yay or nay?
Right now, we're just waiting for our governor to make a decision. That's pretty much it.
And do we have any sense from his office, like, where he's at or what we're looking at in the short term or near term as far as even when he might issue a statement or a decision?
I think it's a little tricky right now. I mean, as somebody obviously who would rather not even think that this is going to happen at all, but maybe would take all that money and put it into real alternative energy and our farmers, if he's not answering with the big no, that's not good enough. And of course, people who are working for the drilling companies and the farmers and the landowners who really want those leases, if he doesn't say yes, it's not good enough for them. What we do know, I can't speak for him. Maybe deep in his heart he knows it's bad, he doesn't want to do it. But he also has presidential aspirations, and that puts everything in a very different decision. Of course, if he said no, it would create a level for us, something to look towards. It would create a completely different quality of making decisions for government on agriculture and farming. Everybody looks to New York for so many things. It would be wonderful to be able to be the state that just banned the whole thing.
Stood up and said no.
That's right.
You guys have the website where people can visit and sign on if they want to show kind of their support for the organization,
Absolutely.
But also their stance against fracking. But you also have some events kind of in the works?
We do. On the 29th of this month at, pardon me, I have to get all my details down. We have an event called Protecting Our Farms, Food and Water from Fracking, and it's at the Journeys Culinary and Herb Center in Brooklyn. And tickets are $25, and there's going to be a big cook-off. All these different chefs from all over New York are actually going to be doing a big pesto cook-off, and everything's going to be from the Marcellus area and all the farms that have been giving us great greens from there. So that should be really fun. And then I don't have an exact date yet, but we are very lucky to have signed Will Blunt, who's one of the heads of starchefs.com, onto our board, and we're going to be doing a bigger ticket fundraiser this summer in July with more of the bigger name chefs who are more than happy to put out a good spread for everybody.
Nice. That sounds like a delicious event.
I hope so.
We are going to head to a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to bring Greg Swartz of Willow Wisp Organic Farm on to give us his view from the farmer's perspective on fracking in New York State.
And there's a backwards old town that's often remembered so many times that my memories are worn. And Daddy, won't you take me back to Muhlenberg County, down by the Green River where paradise lay? Well, I'm sorry, my son, but you're too late in asking. Mr. Peabody's coal train has hauled it away. Well, sometimes we travel right down the Green River to the abandoned old prison down by Avery Hill, where the air smelled like snakes and we'd shoot with our pistols, but empty pop bottles was all we would kill. And Daddy, won't you take me back to Muhlenberg County, down by the Green River where paradise lay?
Hearst Ranch grass-fed beef, pasture raised on 150,000 acres in Central California. Hearst Ranch grass-fed beef, free range, sustainably produced, humane. Hearst Ranch grass-fed beef, the authentic flavor of the American West.
All right, we're back. You're listening to the Farm Report on the Heritage Radio Network. I'm your host, Erin Fairbanks, and we are live in studio with Heather Carlucci-Rodriguez and Alyssa Westervelt, whose name I keep stumbling over. All those S's are tough for me, from Chefs from Marcellus. And then on the line with us is Greg Swartz of Willow Wisp Organic Farm. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
It's great to have you in. So I would love to start with maybe you can give us a little bit of your background. I know that you're currently farming, but you also have a history as you were the former executive director of NOFA and been involved with a bunch of different farms. So maybe you can catch us up quickly on your history.
Sure. The short version is that I moved to this area, which, by the way, my farm is located in the northeast Pennsylvania in the upper Delaware River Valley. And right on the other side of the river is Sullivan County, New York, which Heather mentioned earlier. And I moved to Sullivan County about 12 years ago to do an apprenticeship on a farm. And the thought was just to do a 6-month stint to learn more about where my food came from. And I quickly fell in love with farming and also with this area. So I spent the next 7 years after that apprenticing and working on other farms in the area. And then I took a pause from full-time farming, and as you mentioned, I was the executive director of the Northeast Organic Farming Association of New York for many years. And previous to that, I'd served on the board of directors for a while. So after working with NOFA New York for a number of years, I decided it was time to return to full-time farming. In 2007, while I was director, my wife, Tanis Kowalczyk, and myself purchased our farm here. So that was 2007. And then took a couple of years to get it set up, and 2009 was our first year of full production.
Awesome. How are things going so far this year? It's been such a wonky weather season. I think everyone's kind of like trying to sit on their hands a little bit and wait to make sure it's not going to get too cold. But how are things looking production-wise for you?
It's going to be an interesting roller coaster ride, I think. March was, a tricky time. As you said, we had to successfully hold our horses, as it were. So we're middle of April now, so things are in full swing, and, our greenhouses are popping and first plantings are out in the field. The tricky part is that we are actually radically dry. We have not had very much rain at all, and we're forecast to get a decent amount of rain this weekend. But if we don't get rain this weekend, then we're actually going to be getting the irrigation pumps going, which I can't remember a time I've ever irrigated in April.
Yeah, no, I've definitely heard like a lot of people experiencing it. I've heard the term winter drought, which I'd never heard before, but
indeed, yeah. Which that affects the land, but also it's curious to think about what our rivers and the reservoirs, in particular reservoirs that supply the drinking water for New York City, things are quite low. So it's unclear what might happen. In fact, I was just reading an article this morning that the Delaware River Basin Commission is just starting to evaluate some of their drought planning, which has to do with maintaining or controlling river flows. So it could be a very curious year, especially in comparison to 2011, which was the exact opposite.
Yeah, very wet.
Very wet. Yeah.
Well, it's you have like all those drought issues bring up different kinds of bacterial and water safety issues. But what type of production are you doing at Will-O-Wisp?
We are a certified organic farm, and we grow about over 50 different kinds of vegetables, culinary herbs, and cut flowers. And we market all of it within about 60 miles of the farm to a CSA, community-supported agriculture, 2 local farmers markets, and we direct wholesale to restaurants, retail stores, and other institutional customers.
And how did you get involved with Chefs for Marcellus?
Well, I was fortunate to meet Heather at some point a couple of years ago, and actually, initially, I think the first time that we met, it was actually around this issue of fracking, and so we had lots of conversations about what was happening, as far as happening in our community here in the Delaware River Valley, and then that kind of progressed, and had lots of conversations about what was happening in the New York City restaurant scene. So I was really excited when Heather launched this organization to raise the awareness from the city dwellers' perspective, because it's pretty important as far as food supply goes, but also water supply. So I'm happy to support this campaign and do what I can to give the perspective of a farmer and someone that is a steward of the land in the area from which the water for New York City comes from.
Yeah, so you said you purchased your property back in 2007 and you are located in Pennsylvania. Was fracking on your radar at that point? Was it something that you were concerned about, or how did you kind of start to think about that with regards to your own farm?
Well, it was actually horrible timing. The first kind of dribbles about fracking popped up about 6 months after we bought our farm. I had never heard of it before. It was not really on anyone's radar at that point that there was this Marcellus shale beneath our land. And so 6 months after we bought our farm, I started hearing things, after a month or two of, hearing little tidbits, I said, you know what, I better start looking into this. And, so that was almost 5 years ago now, which is amazing to think that this has been going on that long. But so we quickly kicked into high gear to understand what this thing was and to understand what possible implications for our farm businesses, as well as for myself and my family. And basically, this is, the nutshell analysis is this, that at first, I didn't understand the technology. The way in which it's being implemented is new. I know that you were mentioning before, Heather, that the technology has been around since the 40s, which is true, except that this new way of doing it, which is has a component of horizontal drilling to it, where they actually go down and then turn the drill bit and then go horizontally. And then the mixture of chemicals that they use to actually fracture the shale, that part is all brand new. And what's interesting is that we don't know what the chemicals are that they're using. And it's a fairly shocking situation because we have legislation in place, federal legislation, that went into effect in the 70s that actually is responsible for cleaning up so many watersheds across the country. And very close to home right here, you can look at the history of the Delaware River. And the success of this legislation, which what I'm talking about is the Safe Drinking Water Act and Clean Water Act, actually regulate industry and say that they can't use certain things and that other things they can use, but it's regulated. In other words, it's monitored and there's checks and balances on what can happen.
So, how did they escape this rule?
Well, they escaped the rule because in 2005, in the 2005 Energy Act, which was during the Bush-Cheney administration, there was an exemption put in place for the gas and oil industry, that they were exempt from this federal environmental legislation. The curious thing, of course, is many people know something of the history of Mr. Cheney and that he was an executive of Halliburton, which is one of the originators of hydraulic fracturing. So since 2005, they've been able to roll this out and not be subject to any of this legislation. And the take-home message is, to me, if this is such a safe technology, which many proponents of fracking say how safe it is, if in fact it is so safe, why do they have to be exempted from this baseline environmental legislation? This is not extreme environmental legislation. I would call it extremely conservative. I mean, I would love to see much stronger regulations put in place for the protection of drinking water and aquifers, etc., but it's pretty baseline stuff. So if this technology is so safe, why do they need an exemption?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I would love to hear a response from any of our listeners out there. You can, check us out on the Facebook page or shoot us something via Twitter. Greg, I'm curious, when you started hearing about fracking, and there's kind of this percolating kind of vibe in your region amongst the farm community, were people responding to it in different ways? I mean, as far as I want to say, like maybe older generations of farmers versus new generations, or across different farm types, if you were in livestock production versus vegetable production. Was there any kind of splits that you were seeing as far as people's response to some of the information?
I think the only split could be it may be generational. I gotta have to think about that a little bit, but I think it probably is, yes, based on a farming type, and just to kind of use the catch-all phrase of, some of the more sustainable farmers, farmers practicing sustainable agriculture are much more suspicious and cautious. And we represent a very small percentage of farmers in this region. What happened, this region is an old dairy farming region, and they, dairy farmers have been hurting for a really long time, and so they are, leveraged with debt to the hilt. They're at the whim of a milk market that's controlled by a very small number of very wealthy people, and so they're hurting financially, and so they've seen this as a way to cash in on their decades of hard work. The objection I have to that is that many of them say, well, this is going to help us, it's going to be an infusion of capital, and we're going to keep on farming. My complaint with that argument is that basically hydraulic fracturing and farming are not compatible land uses. So if you are going to welcome a gas drilling rig onto your farm, you're going to compromise the safety and quality of your soil, air, and water. So how can you project out past that to say that you are actually going to be able to successfully raise whatever crop or animal it is that you're farming?
Wow. So how are there any information resources that you found particularly useful? I mean, I think one of the things for me that's been kind of challenging with regards to wrapping my head around this issue is just getting a sense of where to go for information, especially because often the loudest voices are at kind of the extreme ends. So just trying to have maybe a balanced kind of discussion of pros and cons, and I think one of the things that it seems to me is challenging about something like that is you're kind of, making decisions based on kind of different metrics, but maybe there's a resource that you would direct us to that you feel like really puts the issue in pretty simple language and clear light.
Well, it's interesting. There is so much information out there. I mean, it's, and it's so different than 5 years ago. It's just it's shocking. And so like many complicated issues, like you just said, you have to be a really discerning, you have to have a discerning eye to it to interpret it in which way, in every which way. So, resources to me like the Delaware Riverkeeper Network have been very helpful. Catskill Mountain Keeper has been very helpful. I also, I read a lot of the kind of industry spin on this. There's groups like Energy in Depth, which is an industry lobbying group that spins a whole bunch of PR out about this. It's it's really good to read their stuff and square that up with everything else. To take both sides, and I definitely take pieces from everywhere. And there was a great series in New York Times last year, which many of your listeners probably saw, which was revelatory in a lot of ways, but most specifically in terms of the inability of state regulators to really control this industry. They really focused on Pennsylvania in that series, but even beyond in Ohio and the West, et cetera. And that kind of harkens back to one of my main questions, which I already said that hasn't been answered, and I've asked it so many times, which is, if this technology is so safe, why can't you comply with this basic environmental legislation?
Yeah, I think it's a very powerful and simple question. Heather, you had some resources that you guys were recommending as well? Or?
Yeah, there's one that we work with pretty closely. It's called Food and Water Watch, and they also they have they have really great resources for the dates of government decisions, legislations, even just community groups. And they also happen to work internationally, which, though we're talking on the local level, fracking is a threat internationally at this point. And there have been a lot of countries who have really taken a stand against banning it, like France. So I think that's a really good resource to consider. I would definitely go to them.
Excellent. Well, Greg, thank you so much for joining us. It was great to kind of get your perspective. We are actually going to bring on one more farmer today.
Thank you, Greg.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
You too.
Thank you. We are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have Luce Guanzini of Highwood Farms on to give her perspective on fracking. So stick with us. We'll be right back.
Side of the road, the lorries rolling by, blue moon sinking from the weight of the load, and the buildings scrape the sky, cold wind ripping down the alley at dawn, and the morning paper fly, dead man lying by the side of the road with the daylight in his eyes. Don't let it bring you down, it's only burning. Find someone who's turning, and you will come around. Blind man running through the light of the night with an answer.
All right, we are back, taking a dramatic pause for effect. You are tuned into the Heritage Radio Network. You're listening to the Farm Report. I am your host, Erin Fairbanks, and we are in studio with two of the ladies of the Chefs from Marcellus, and on the line with Luce Guanzini of Highwood Farm. Luce, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for taking time out of, I know it's a busy day for you, to call in and kind of give your perspective on this issue. I thought we would start with getting a little bit of your background. I know we've had your husband, Mark, on the show as you guys participated in the No Goat Left Behind project we did last year, but you also work full-time off the farm. That's correct?
That's correct, yep. I work at Cornell. I work at the vet school primarily.
Excellent. And you guys are raising meat goats up in Spencer, New York.
That's correct. Yep. We started kidding and have about 15 or 17 on the ground at the moment.
That's awesome. Things are going pretty smoothly in the kidding arena?
So far, so good.
Excellent. And just as a reminder, how long have you guys been farming?
We've been on this property about 16 years now, I think, and had goats on the property for about 14. I had raised sheep and goats prior to that, so I've really been doing this since I finished college in '84.
Wow, so got some years under your belt there.
It seems that way.
So you guys are located not far from Pennsylvania, I think just around 25 miles from some active shale fields. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, Bradford County is just about 25 miles south of us. We're just north of Waverly, New York, if people find that on a map. Nichols, New York, and due south of that is some of the shale gas activity or drilling region that's been in the news.
So when you guys, came onto your property up at Highwood, was fracking an issue that was on your radar, or how did you guys kind of start hearing about it?
Certainly fracking was not on radar. There have been conventional gas wells in this area for many years. The first property that I owned in Newfield actually had a lease on it that was expiring at the time I bought the property back in '84. So I think that folks in this area sort of felt like they knew a little something about gas wells, and that would be conventional gas wells. The companies started coming back into the area and actively leasing again about probably 10 years ago, and at that time they talked to us about the Trenton Black River Formation. That gas is, if I remember correctly, about 10,000 feet deep, and those are essentially conventional gas wells where the drilling is primarily vertical, and there's a single well on a pad, and the drilling units are 640 acres. So there's been wells of that nature in our town that were developed probably 8 to 10 years ago. But 5 years ago, when a lot of folks in our area released, there was no discussion of fracking with the residents or this type of industrial gas development. And shortly after we had actually signed a no surface rights lease, it was all over the news that there was this fantastic new technology where gas was going to come out of the ground everywhere. So a lot of folks in our area were blindsided by this sort of development.
Well, that's like a really interesting perspective and one that I haven't heard before, just with regards to that, like there was a history of gas drilling that, am I kind of getting the right implication from you that it had gone kind of well for people in the past, essentially?
I would say you could probably characterize it as well. There were, we didn't have any explosions. We didn't hear too much of anything about contaminated water wells. There were rumors that some landowners had made quite a bit of money over a short period of time. So I think at least initially people, thought that it was more of the same. But that's proven not to be the case.
And you had mentioned you signed a no surface rights. Is that what you said? Can you talk a little bit more about what that is?
That's right. So in New York State, there's a law called compulsory integration. And what that means is that if a company has 60% of the land already leased in a proposed unit, and again, a unit is 640 acres, and how that unit is drawn is worked out, as I understand it, between the gas company and the DEC. If 60% of the land is already under lease, then the remaining acreage in that unit is produced anyway, and the folks that are in the unit but don't have a lease undergo what's called compulsory integration. So what that means is that they take the gas anyway, and you will get paid, and how you get paid you have a little bit of say over. You can become a part owner in the well, or you can essentially accept what would have been the lease agreement that was offered at the time you presumably refused to sign. So knowing that, almost 6 years ago now, we decided after a lot of fretting, frankly, that we would sign a no surface rights lease. And what that means is that the gas company doesn't have any right to actually come onto your property or drill on your property, but you have agreed to accept their terms of the lease should you end up in a unit. So our lease, actually, we tried to adjust a little bit to ensure some better guarantees about water quality. The standard lease that what had been Fortuna and then became Talisman was signing at the time is that if your water is damaged, they would make, I think the phrase was something like, all commercially viable attempts to restore your water, and we struck the commercially viable and left in all attempts to restore potable water. But, of course, in retrospect, that was really rather foolhardy on our part, because they seem to get away with not restoring anybody's potable water, and, in fact, they probably can't. But at any rate, that's sort of the short story there.
That sounds really complicated, and I just have to say, as someone whose primary profession is food production, I mean, did you need to engage with, legal counsel, or how did you navigate those conversations and even making informed decisions about what to include or not include? And, of course, hindsight is 20/20, but what are kind of the on-the-ground resources for people looking to, ask some questions of these types of arrangements?
Well, at that time there were some lawyers, some attorneys practicing in the area. Of course, many neighbors were being approached, so, the communities were talking about this. There were some landowner coalitions that were formed, I think dating back to that time. Again, talking between 5 and 10 years ago. The current one that's just been in the press for potentially signing a lease with a company whose name is going to slip my mind, that's proposing this gel propane, this new fracking technique. I think that landowners coalition has been in existence for quite a few years, and probably dating back to that time. So there were some resources in the area to gather information about, but again, the type of development that we're talking about now was simply not on the table. The landmen that come around and, talk to you about what this might look like, when you ask questions about, well, what's the activity going to be like while the well is being drilled, and what's the traffic like, and how big is the well pad, and, what are your limitations on the pipeline, and these sorts of things. That was all quite different then.
And so what do things look like for you now? I mean, say that the, moratorium is lifted, how would that impact your business?
Well, it would certainly make it a very unpleasant place to live, as far as I'm concerned. I grew up on Long Island and wanted desperately to live in a rural area. In fact, we spent summers right in the northeast corner of Pennsylvania, which is also currently threatened by this sort of development. So I very much wanted to live in a rural area from my childhood, and if this goes forward, it simply won't be a rural area anymore. If the gas companies had their way and had full development, there would be a well pad approximately every half a mile in every direction. The number of wells on a single pad could be somewhere up in the number of 24. It takes, according to Dr. Ingraffia here at Cornell and a number of other sources, it takes 2 to 9 million gallons of water to frack a single well. So that turns into hundreds and hundreds of trips with tanker trucks. So you're really talking about changing the landscape in the community quite dramatically. The town of Towanda, where in Bradford County, where this is sort of the hub of this activity. It's a small town where you used to be able to drive through it in a few minutes' time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, you were through the town center. Now we hear about people that it will take an hour to just get through town because the traffic is so backed up. People whose commutes to work have been increased exponentially. It really is just, it's shocking to go into that area. It was known as the Endless Mountains of Pennsylvania. It was really, really beautiful, and just the truck traffic alone makes it not so beautiful anymore and not very pleasant to drive around down there.
Wow. So we are in the studio with Heather and Alyssa of Chefs from Marcellus. They're a New York City-based organization that works with chefs and food professionals in the kind of urban center to draw attention to this issue and do some partnership with farms like yours. And I think, Heather, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, so she was just talking about, sort of what the effects of a small town would be. And I think a lot of the things also that people also don't realize is that, they talk a lot about bringing jobs to these areas in dire need of employment. And most of the people that are going to be working these rigs are not from here. They are outsourced.
That's absolutely right.
And the businesses that actually do benefit from what I'm hearing right now at restaurants, bars, bordellos, and the drug trade. Because all these people are, the offshore drillers. They are very transient. It brings in a different element into most areas. Also, the biggest injuries that happen from these drillings are chemical burns and fire burns. And most of these places don't have burn units. They're far, far away.
Yes, that's correct. There's also, because of the influx of outsiders, if you will, the cost of renting a home has doubled and tripled. I read a statistic, it was about 18 months ago, probably now, from Bradford County, where they recorded an increase of admissions into foster care for children of 30%. And I thought, that doesn't make any sense. But when you step back and think about it, it makes quite good sense. People who are poor can't afford their housing anymore. They end up homeless. They turn their kids into the foster care system. So it has quite dramatic impacts. I know another acquaintance who has a friend who has a small business down in Pennsylvania, and he was paying, if I remember correctly, around $500 a month to rent a little office space for his business, and the landlord increased the rent dramatically. He can't afford to rent that space anymore. So it displaces a lot of people in the community and really kind of upsets the economy. And they're really not. There's a few, there's some jobs as waitresses and in the service industry, but they're really not jobs for local people.
And also remember, these once the fracking's over, they can only drill for so long. These industries leave. The people leave. The customers leave.
That's right. Yeah, it's a boom-bust sort of an arrangement. And the wells leak, and these wells will, leave a legacy of environmental damage that New York State taxpayers are going to have to clean up. If people are interested, Dr. Tony Angrafia has some great information. You can search his name, and I'm sure it'll come right up. He presented some data that's actually industry data that shows that conventional gas wells, in the first year, 6% of those are leaking methane, so they've failed. They're not capturing all the methane that has been disturbed underground, if you will. At year 30, 60% of those wells are leaking methane, and there's no reason to believe that the current shale gas wells will do any better. In fact, the early data indicates that they leak at similar rates, and they've only been drilling these types of wells and using this type of technology for about 5 years now, so it's really early days yet. And with a well every half mile, I think the potential for long-term damage to the environment and the water supply is really tremendous.
Wow. Luce, I'm so sorry we are out of time, but thank you so much for coming on and sharing your perspective. And I think really painting a pretty intense portrait of some of the things that are possible should this moratorium be lifted. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to share what's going on here with your audience.
Excellent. Want to give ladies another chance to shout out about the pesto event coming up this weekend.
Yeah, one of our many more interesting fundraisers. It's going to be on the 29th on Sunday, and at the Journey's Culinary and Herb Center in Brooklyn at 540 President Street. And tickets are $25, and it's from noon to 4.
All right, folks, put your money where your mouth is. Get a ticket, go out, enjoy some delicious pesto, and tune in next week at 1 o'clock for another episode of The Farm Report.
Thanks for listening to this program on the Heritage Radio Network. You can find all of our archive programs on heritageradionetwork.com, as well as a schedule of upcoming live shows. You can also podcast all of our programs on iTunes by searching Heritage Radio Network in the iTunes Store. You can find us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter for up-to-date news and information. Thanks for listening.